Hello everyone, this is David Arlent, and I am starting my Babylon 5 challenge. I finished watching Babylon 5, The Gathering, and just to let you know, I will be reading off of some notes, or looking at notes, and the reason is, number one, I'm about to hit the big 5-0 here next March, and my memory is not what it used to be, and number two, I used to be a registered nurse, and I blew out my back many years ago. If you check out one of my other channels, Chronic Pain Guy, I go into some detail about what happened and the injuries that it left me. And the moral of that story is that I take a lot of painkillers, muscle relaxers, and other stuff that just really does funny things to your memory. So, Babylon 5 came out February 22nd, 1993, or I should say The Gathering came out. Babylon 5 ran from 93 to 98. Hence also the part of the name 5 was meant for 5 years. So, and then that also kind of after about the third or the fourth and fifth year especially, they wasn't sure that they were going to be able to pull that off. And so there's a little bit of disconnect between the plot lines because they were not sure if this was going to be the end. And so it seems like at several points that they're going to end this, the whole thing early. And then they would magically, Warner Brothers would come down with another year. And so they kept adding to the storyline until they did finally pull the plug. One of the things Babylon 5 is noted for is the story arc. A lot of, like, if you look at the Star Trek series, all the way through the Next Generation, a lot of them are just single stories. The advantage of that is you can come in, watch a few episodes, come out, watch it, not miss a couple episodes, come back, watch a few more episodes, and you haven't really missed anything. With the story arc, you have to watch it really from beginning to end. If you don't, you miss out on a lot of the storyline, a lot of the details, and then you're trying to figure out, like, Now, back then, in the 90s, when Babylon 5 came out, we didn't have things like the internet, or the internet was just starting. But you didn't have things like Netflix, where within a couple weeks after, a series hits, it didn't, you can just go back and pick up where you left off, if that makes any sense. In the 90s, if you missed the series, you missed the series, and you would have to wait until it came out on DVD, which could take months or even years in some cases. So I'm wondering in the newest one about Commander Jeffrey Sinclair. Are they going to have Commander Jeffrey Sinclair in the Babylon 5 reboot, or are they going to kind of immortalize, or memorialize, I should say, Michael O'Hara's role in Jeffrey Sinclair and just not have a Jeffrey Sinclair? That they'll just do a John Sheridan storyline. And from what I saw on some of the tweets and press releases from Warner Brothers, it looks like they're just going to go with the Captain John Sheridan, and they're just going to leave Commander Jeffrey Sinclair memorialized in the original series in the past. One of the things you'll notice that's different about The Gathering as opposed to the other series is that Delane is really, I'm trying to figure out the right word for it, but she's, if she's transgendered, because at first she was going to be male, and then when she went into her chrysalis, then she would change into a female. Now, at that time, Ellen DeGeneres did not come out until 97, and there really were not very many out actors in the LGBTQ community who would go public. Most of them had to stay in the closet because if they came out as LGBTQ+, they would be shunned and fired, and all kinds of things could happen to them. And there were no laws at that time to protect members of the LGBTQ community. So you could be fired legally, and in fact, to this day, in over half of the states in the United States, you can still be fired for being gay. A lot of the protections just apply to federal workers only. Unless your state, like I live in Oregon, Oregon does have protection, but if you go across the Snake River into Idaho, if your boss finds out you're gay, they legally can fire you for that reason and for no other reason. So when they started to explore Delane's sexuality, that was kind of a new thing, especially for the sci-fi genre. Ellen DeGeneres didn't come out until 97. And they also, and you'll see this a couple other times, like with Commander Susan Ivanova, having maybe a relationship with the the first season's telepath, which is ironic too, because as you'll find out later in the series, Ivanova absolutely hates telepaths. So of course it would make sense that she falls in love with one. Another thing you'll notice, like, as you go through the gathering, Delane makes it pretty plain when she tries to give information to Commander Sinclair that she has never met a Vorlon. Now, if any of you have seen the series, you know that that is absolutely a lie. And Delane seems to have no problems twisting the truth when it suits her purposes. You'll also notice another big lie that Delane does is she doesn't tell Jeffrey Sinclair about his time on board a Mambari cruiser during the Earth-Mambari War. Now, I'm jumping ahead a little bit on that one, so I'm not going to cover it too much until a little bit later, when it's not so much of a revealing what's going to happen later. Another thing that you'll notice on the gathering that is Mr. Morden plays a guy named Guerrera, and he's on the bridge. He ends up becoming Mr. Morden and becoming the chief antagonist of the first several series, working for the Shadows. But during the gathering, he's just there on the bridge and just helping out. And then all of a sudden, he becomes the main antagonist. And you're like, huh? So I'm not sure how they explain that, or if they even did explain it. Maybe he changed his name several times. And whatever happened to him on Zahadum happened a little bit later. But I can't remember how exactly. If someone could put that in the comment section, that would be great. Another thing that you'll notice on the gathering is the poisoning of Ambassador Kosh. Now, Ambassador Kosh is one of my favorite characters. Kind of like the old grandfather, or really ancient grandfather, to John Sheridan, certainly, and a little bit of an advisor to Commander Sinclair. What has never really success. He's supposed to be this being of light and magic and all of that good stuff. And I know that they show a picture of him reaching out an arm to greet Commander Sinclair when Commander Sinclair turns around and slaps a poison patch on his arm, and we find out later that it's not Commander Sinclair. But as I used to be a registered nurse, and it just kind of makes me go, what? transdermal medications don't react that quickly. And, when Kosh is sitting here trying to struggle with the fake Commander Sinclair, who's under a changeling net, it turns out to be a Mambari warrior. They don't really explain how the poison gets into his system, but it gets in and he nearly dies, and then Dr. Benjamin Kyle saves him. Another question that I kind of also had too is Lita Alexander, one of my other favorite characters, she's only a P5, even though she's a 6th plus generation telepath. And she also makes a comment too that about half of the people who try out for a P5 rating end up burning out or becoming vegetables, which makes me wonder, well, how the heck does anyone get up to a P12 during that? So it's a little bit unclear. Also, as a nurse, and this is one of my where I kind of geek out moments, but they all put on their breathing masks to deal with Ambassador Kosh. And they talk about his atmosphere having lots of methane and stuff like that. What I can tell you as a nurse, you've got this face mask over your face, but you have no protection for your eyes or your skin. And that methane will eat, your eyes and stuff like that if you don't have some sort of protection to keep it away. So, one of my little geek points about that. Another thing that they talk about, or someone makes, is that Mambari are the oldest race. I believe it was Jakar that said that Mambari are the oldest of the 5 races. Well, we now know that the Vorlons are much older than the Mambari by quite a lot. So, makes me wonder, during the reboot, are they going to have that same kind of a scenario where the Vorlons are super ancient, the Mambari are old, and Earth is just this little spring chicken that's just kind of joining the fray, and doesn't have a lot of technology compared to the other races. Another thing that's kind of interesting too is Patricia Tallman, one of my favorite actresses, but she's also now divorced from J. Michael Straczynski. She is still running some of his Babylonian productions, and so they still have some sort of connection. So I'm wondering how that's going to play out, if she is going to be in the new series at all, or if that's just going to be too weird. One person suggested, or actually a couple people, when I've talked about this in the chat rooms on Facebook, some people have wondered if they're going to retype her as a female Alfred Bester. And just kind of a switch that you don't see coming kind of thing. Another thing that doesn't quite make me go, huh, is when this fake Sinclair comes to, put the poison Ambassador Kosh. Why didn't Kosh sense what was going on? Because we know he's at least partly telepathic to some degree. Why didn't his little telepathic senses send danger, danger? This guy's not who he claims to be, but, they also talk, too, about a Vorlon Empire. So I'm wondering, who is the Emperor? And who is the Empress? If there is such a thing with beings of light and magic. If they're ever going to explain, exactly what the Vorlon Empire is during the reboot. One thing that when I watch the Babylon 5 series, is it relates to me in so many different levels. When Carolyn was talking about Sinclair's girlfriend on and off, when she talks about she never knew that Sinclair was at the Battle of the Line. Well, my dad was a Korean War veteran. He served in the Navy from 1950 to 54. Before that, he served in the Army from 45 to 49, and then right when he got out of the Army, Korea broke out, and they invited him to rejoin. He didn't want to run up and down the peninsula of Korea and be shot at, so he went and joined the Navy instead, and sent the Army recruiters a letter saying, "Hey, I joined the Navy. If you want me, come and find me." But my dad supposedly was involved in combat. He always denied it to us kids, but we also heard from many sources that he was up and down the Korean Peninsula, and some of the stuff that he saw just horrified him to such an extent that he just flat out never talked about it. I had an interesting, when I was working in a country club, one of my co-workers was an actual Korean War veteran, a decorated Marine, I believe it was. This is 30 years ago, so. And he says, David, find out what his decorations and stuff were, and, I can tell you whether or not he was. And so I called the VA and found out, his service record, so I went and told him about the fight, and he looked at me. He said, "David, your dad saw combat." He says, "I'm 95% certain he saw combat." And kind of, when Sinclair was talking about, the sky full of stars and everything like that, it kind of reminds me, about my dad. And that's the thing you're going to find a lot in Babylon 5 is how a lot of these characters have completely relatable storylines to either you or someone that's close to you. And I'll try and point these out as I go along. If you watch this series, it's really interesting about how the PPG guns change. They have these little curved pieces of plastic, and then during the series, those little things change to something that looks a little bit like a 6-shooter. And the original guns shot kind of like a phaser that you would see in Star Trek. However, in the series, they shoot something that looks like a big flashing bullet, kind of a reddish-orange bullet, kind of flaring in until it hits something. Another thing you're going to see, kind of a Babylon 5 meme, is there is a hole in your mind. A lot of Babylon 5 fans will say that to someone, and it refers to a 24-hour period where Commander Sinclair was taken on board a Mambari ship. Well, the Mambari wiped his memory, and so this one Mambari, when they were fighting him towards the end, said there is a hole in your mind, and so that kind of became a popular meme along Babylon 5 fans. So this is, if you've ever heard that and wonder where does that come from, this initial pilot episode is where it came from. Another thing that you'll see also too is Dr. Benjamin says, "I have looked upon the face of a Vorlon, Laurel," referring to Laurel Takashima, the assistant commander, who, by the way, is never seen again afterwards. Another thing you'll see in Babylon 5 is that anybody can be written in or out, sometimes health and mental issues, with there's a Michael OHara, Commander Sinclair, Michael OHara is the actor's name. He has some very, very serious mental health issues, and as Babylon 5 goes on, you'll see that. Towards the end of the first season, he really looks sick, and so J. Michael Straczynski, or JMS, wrote him out for longer periods of time and would bring him back as his mental health improved. Would bring him back for, kind of help pay the bills, and that's another thing that JMS gets a lot of credit for. We didn't know a lot of this until after Michael O'Hare died. The extent that JMS went to help him. And you'll see that a lot with the characters in Babylon 5. Another thing that helped him control Kosh, because one thing that Babylon 5 is noted for is during the entire Babylon 5 storyline only cost $93 million. And that's less than $20 million a season. And that's one of the reasons why, number one, it had a cult following, and number two, they kept the cost down. And one of the things that kept the cost down was, well, if you asked for too much money or you couldn't come to terms, they would just write you out. So you'll see that a lot. Beep Beep. If you ever see that meme from Babylon 5 fans, this pilot episode goes into that. And I'm not going to go into it a whole lot because, if you just watch the episode, it becomes somewhat self-explanatory. Now, I can tell you, I'll just briefly say that Sinclair allegedly, and it turns out he was playing a practical joke, put in some sort of nano chip in Ambassador Jakar's drink and basically threatened him, saying, look, if anything happens to Babylon 5, this nano chip can be tracked down by my friends in the military and they will do nasty, horrible things to you. And as a nurse, I can tell you, and one of the things Jerry Doyle's line was, do you have any idea the amount of tests they're going to put him through looking for that thing? And I can tell you, as someone who was a nurse, I can imagine the tests because I've had to give some of those tests to a lot of my patients. So I just had this flashback of my nursing career. Anyway, that's pretty much what I have in my notes. Babylon 5, one of the things that has impressed me, and I've gone over this before, but it bears repeating, is that Babylon 5 has a lot of totally relatable characters. You have the alcoholics, you have the drug addicts, you have the questionable sexualities, or the differing genders, different aliens. Some of the things that kind of is disappointing, but in the pilot episode, you'll see a lot of aliens that you'll just never see in the regular series, and I'm not quite sure what that is, if it was a budget issue or what. But anyway, another thing that I think I'm going to enjoy is during the reboot is the upgrade in the CGI. I think that's going to be, because one thing Babylon 5 was noted for, in the original, it was CGI was ahead of its time. Now, of course, compared to now, it's really quaint and old, but for the time, it was really good. So one of the things I'm going to be really excited to see is the change in CGI and how that plays out on the soap screen. So anyways, I'm recording this on a Friday, so I want to wish you all a happy weekend. And I also need to do the usual. Please comment, like, subscribe, and share. Hope you all have a blessed rest of your evening. Thanks.